This is my cat Spot, and though she doesn't comprehend, I nonetheless consider her a true and valued friend. Welcome to Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. I'm your host, a scratching post in a uniform. Kicking us off at 592, Yar's sister, or Legacy. The Enterprise is trying to save the crew of a freighter in emergency orbit of Tasha Yar's home planet, Tarkana 4. An escape pod goes down towards the anarchist colony, and the crew try to get them back. When they contact one of the warring factions, they soon discover that Tasha's sister is a member and work with her to help retrieve the freighter crew. In reality, she's only helping them so she can carry out a terrorist plot in her enemy's territory. Data has to make a hard choice and stop her plot. Seems like the writers wanted us to feel something with the connection to Tasha, but it feels too far removed. The only reason I've ranked this as high is the poker game in the intro teaches Data about being deceived, then Tasha's sister deceives him, and he and Riker close with a talk about trust. The mission the Enterprise was diverted from was on Camus 2, which is the planet in the 79th and final episode of TOS, and this was the 80th episode of TNG, and marked surpassing its predecessor's run. Creating uproar at 591. The Troubles with Crusher, or The High Ground. We open into a terrorist bombing in a community the Enterprise is visiting. Crusher immediately tries to help the wounded, when 4 separate people try to tell her it's not safe. But she has to do her gung-ho doctor thing anyway. The group responsible for the bombing beams in, grabs her, and beams out with a long-range transporter. They want her to help treat the genetic damage caused by their transporter, and as a bargaining chip to help get supplies from the Federation. When things aren't going the way that they wanted, the group tries to blow up the Enterprise and is very nearly successful. By the end, they figure out where the group is and get Crusher back after Picard was taken prisoner during the attempted destruction of the Enterprise. The episode was very divisive in the UK, to the point that it's never been aired on the BBC. Between the mention of the Irish reunification of 2024 and the terrorist bombings that were too reminiscent of what was going on in the real world between the British government and the Irish Republican Army at the time, this one was too much for British censors to bear. Placating an old man at 590, Janeway's dad, or Resistance. Janeway, Tuvok, and Torres get a ride on Neelix's ship to a planet with a huge Big Brother state and prison system. Neelix gets the source of energy they were here to trade for and makes it back to Voyager just in the nick of time before they run out of energy for life support. Meanwhile, Tuvok and B'Elanna are sidelined for the rest of the episode, and Janeway ends up pulled off the street by a troubled old man that thinks she's his daughter. Over the course of the episode, we get a Rain Man-like Broken Man story about how his wife and daughter have been imprisoned, only to find out in the end they've been dead for years, killed by the state, but he can't admit it to himself. While his story is interesting, it's precisely one good act. A decent ending when they break Tuvok and B'Elanna out so Voyager can swoop in and beam them up. If you can get through half of a drag of an episode, you end up feeling bad for this guy. Not drinking the Kool-Aid at 589, Dukat Town, or Covenant. A Vedic that once taught Kira shows up and uses a long-range transporter to take her to Empok Nor. What she finds there are a group of Bajorans in the Pa-Wraith cult, being led by Dukat, whose recent Pa-Wraith experience makes him a messiah. He had Kira brought here because, for some reason, Dukat has been desperately seeking her approval for the last few seasons, and won't get it here either. Kira tries to convince the cult members that Dukat is a false prophet, but they won't listen, even when a half-Cardassian child is born to 2 Bajoran parents and it's clearly Dukat's kid. In the end, Dukat tries to wash his hands of the cult with suicide pills that will turn the whole group into piles of dust. though his is just for show, and Kira foils his plot and finally makes the cult members see what's really going on, and stops a mass atrocity. Dukat transports out to parts unknown. Though the writers were using the 1997, very recent at the time, Heaven's Gate cult tragedy as a direct inspiration for this one, which resulted in Nichelle Nichols' brother and 38 others taking their own lives. It more closely resembles one of the most tragic events in the world in the last 50 years, the 1978 Jonestown incident. If there's anyone that doesn't know what happened there, it did not turn out well for anyone. Being haunted at 588, don't tell mom she is dead. Or the bonding. While on an archaeological dig, an away team Worf is in command of sets off an explosive from centuries before. One of the away team members is killed in the line of duty, leaving a young boy without a mother. Deanna sensed the whole thing about to happen to the away team in an uncharacteristic usefulness post-season 2, and is actually good at her job of counseling throughout this episode. Worf wants to perform a Klingon ritual called Rustai, the bonding, to bring the boy into his family, and Deanna tells him it would be a bad idea. Young Jeremy starts seeing a figment of his mother and their home and cat back on Earth. Turns out it's an energy life form from the planet that wants to make up for the accidental death of his mother, in a way that I'm sure is not traumatizing for the child any further. They convince it to leave, and Worf performs the Rustai, because I guess Jeremy's more ready for it now that he's had an even more traumatizing event. At one point, Picard orders Troy to remove the boy and take him to his quarters. Of all the places on the ship, the guy that hates kids wants this kid brought to his quarters. At another point, Troy and Worf are talking about the situation in the upper computer core, with seemingly no reason to be there. This one could have been a nice PTSD for children message, and then amplified this kid's pain for the sake of turning out an episode. If you do not like and subscribe, I will not change her back if she turns into an iguana. Being bullied at 587, daddy issues, or lineage. B'Elanna finds out she's pregnant and that the child has a minor defect the doctor needs to do a genetic procedure to correct. Torres, never liking her Klingon half, starts messing around with genetic engineering to make her child look and be more human, and even reprogramming the doctor when he disagrees so he'll go along with her idea. Throughout the runtime, we get flashbacks to an incident in B'Elanna's childhood where she was bullied by her cousins on a camping trip, and blames herself and her Klingon DNA for her father leaving shortly after. The doctor talks about the now debunked idea of baby Mozart making your child smarter through music in the womb. I'm sure this one feels significant to some viewers out there that have dealt with bullying or family issues similar to this, but I've always found this one like Hitler trying to create a master race, and it just doesn't sit well with me. Taking a step backwards at 586, critical race theory, or Cardassians. While enjoying a cup of hot fish juice with Bashir, Garak is bitten by a Cardassian boy when he compliments him. Turns out the boy is one of many Cardassians and half Cardassian orphans left on Bajor at the end of the Cardassian occupation. Some accusations are made that the boy's adopted Bajoran parents are training him to hate his birth people. Then the freighter captain that brought them to the station tells a different story about how he's hated by his parents and they beat him. Sisko places Rugal with the O'Briens temporarily while the situation gets sorted out. To complicate this mess of a story even further, the Cardassian government gets involved and has found Rugal's original Cardassian father and sends him to the station to contest the boy's custody. In the end, they find out Dukat likely had the boy placed in the orphanage to spite the boy's father for voting to end the occupation of Bajor in the first place. This one has so many twists and turns, and honestly the only good part is Bashir and Garak growing their relationship through investigating what really happened. Hooking up at 585. stranded. Or the price. A race called the Barzan have discovered a stable wormhole they think leads to the Gamma Quadrant. And the Enterprise is hosting bidding negotiations between 3 factions trying to buy it. The Ferengi demand to be part of it also. When Geordi, Data, and another shuttle of Ferengi go through the wormhole, they find themselves in the Delta Quadrant instead. The Ferengi won't listen to Geordi in time and get stranded there for Voyager to find a few years later. The wormhole is declared worthless since the other end moves around. One of the negotiators is a telepath that has a cringeworthy single-episode romance with Troy. It has god-awful soap opera music every time they're together that occasionally reminds me of the Never-Ending Story. Literally, the love story drags this episode down about 100 ranks from the mediocre A-plot, being only the second 2-parter to make this list at 583 and 584. The Ophidian, or Time Zero. Archaeologists on Earth find a 500-year-old version of Data's head in a cavern below San Francisco, and the Enterprise returns to investigate. They discover microbes that can only be found on another planet, and head there to investigate. While exploring a cave on Navidia 2, Data must phase himself to see the inhabitants and accidentally gets pulled into a time portal they've been using to reach 1890s Earth. Data investigates Old West San Francisco and cleans out not Gul Dukat in a poker game to earn some money to support himself. Apparently Guinan visited Earth all these years ago and is the only woman of color in the entire US to be allowed into high society of the 1890s. After crashing a party she's throwing, Data meets Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain. The rest of the main cast find a way to phase themselves and move through time also, where we pick them up in part 2. Where the first part sets up an intriguing mystery, this one meanders to a conclusion where they find the aliens from Navidia are sucking the neural energy from people of Earth to feed themselves. The crew does their cringeworthy best to muddle through the 19th century before finally meeting up with Data, and finding they must go to the cave Data's head was discovered in back in the 24th century. After a confrontation with the aliens, they accidentally kill one, another escapes, and Data's head is blown off in the scuffle. Everyone except the captain makes it back to their own time after the fight, but Picard stays to save Guinan's life, thus setting up their more-than-friendship in the future. They reattach the 500-year-old severed head to Data and find a message tapped in by the captain to not use photon torpedoes to destroy the cave, or it will amplify the time distortions. Mark Twain gets a brief look at the future before being sent back with instructions on getting the captain home. Wow, this may be one of the more convoluted plots that took me quite a while to reiterate. At one point, Mark Twain mentions Halley's Comet, which is said to have made its appearance both on the day of his birth and death. Bev shows how useless she truly is, hitting a new low by saying cholera isn't that virulent. See 19th century London history for what makes that not true. In my estimation, Trek only has one passable Western story, and this isn't it.
Computer.
That program is available.
Thanks, Majel. Majel. Thanks, Majel. Majel.
Define real in context, please.
Thanks, Majel.
Human, age 41.
Majel.
Damon Goss departed the Enterprise at 1400 hours.
Thanks, Majel.
Last time on Star Trek The Next Generation.
Thanks, Majel.
And now, the conclusion.
Thanks, Majel.
File accessed.
Majel.
Lieutenant Torres is in sickbay,
Thanks, Majel.
unable to comply.
Majel.
Once the darkness comes and the daylight fades,